Hi everyone, welcome to the very first session of Introduction to Python Coding. My name is Andrea and I'm a Digital Services Librarian at Richmond Public Library. So, Python is a pretty great language to use. As you can see, there's a lot of pretty big tech companies that use it in their infrastructure, but some general things that make it a pretty great language to use are Python is fairly simple and uses language that is similar enough to English that if you're just beginning, it might be easier to grasp than something like C# or anything like that. Because of the way it's designed, we get instant feedback of what the code that we inputted was, and Python can really be used for anything from machine learning and AI to just making simple games that you can share with your friends. So we're going to get started with what we're going to be working on this week. So every week for the next 4 sessions, this is going to be a bi-weekly program. We are going to be making a simple game or project. It's going to be different every week, and these will introduce some basic concepts of Python that you can take forward and use in more complex projects. So this week we are going to be downloading the Python and Idle app for your computer. There's a couple other options that you can use. There's Replit, which is a website that you need to make an account for. And there's also Trinket, which we have used in the past as a visualizer. But for this one, we're going to be sticking with Idle. And this week we're going to be making a Mad Lib game. And some of the concepts that we are going to be learning and using this week that I hope you'll be able to use in the future are strings, inputs and outputs, variables, and the print function. So let's get started on our game. So to download Python, we're just going to go to python.org. You can also just search for Python on your preferred internet browser. And we're going to go to downloads at the top here. And I'm going to download the very newest edition. I'm on a Mac, so it is reading my operating system and offering me the one that is best for me. So just download that. As you can see, I just get a little pop-up here with more information about what I'm doing. I'm just going to agree and install that. All right, so before we start our game, let's go over the concepts that we previously discussed that we're going to be using this week to make our Mad Libs game. So first of all, you'll notice that although the language that we downloaded was Python, we are coding in Idle. So while Python is the coding language we will be using, Idle is the editor that we're going to be coding that language within. There's a couple other options if you wanted to use Replit or Trinket online, but this is the option that you have that's officially from the Python organization. So the first thing we're going to talk about is strings. So a string is essentially a collection of characters beginning and ending with single or double quotation marks. So this can be something like hello world. It can be something like 1 plus 3, 1 plus 2. It can be essentially any characters as long as they're contained within the quotation marks. And the other thing that's really nice with Python is you can choose to use either single or double. I would recommend within one coding project that you would pick one, but either one works. The second thing we are going to look at is a variable. So this would be like x equals 2 or x equals a string. So you define the variable as soon as you put it into your code. So if I was to say print my x, and then run my module, first it needs to save. We're going to call this test. But you can see I printed my x value. So that's the other thing. You can see I have two X values here, but your code will only choose the one that you did last. So you can overwrite variables if you're not careful. And we're going to talk about inputs. So input is something that is going to ask for the user to input some information. So we can also say X equals an input. So instead of us defining that variable, the user will define that variable. And the very last thing we're going to look at is output. So this is going to be something that appears on your code when you are running it. So for our purposes, we're going to be using print, as we did before, print X, and save again. And you can see it printed our X, which is our input, what is your name? And this is really important because you can see that the things we didn't put print in front of our hello world string, our 1 plus 2, our X equals 2, none of that printed. So if you want things to be output in a way that your users can see, you need to say print. And now that we've learned those basic concepts, we can get started on our game. So this is going to be the basic outline of our Mad Lib. Name decided to go to the famous person library since they wanted to read about animals that verb. They talked to a librarian who told name the library had number books about animals that verb. The librarian took name to the library's room and down the hall. Name saw books about adjective bugs, adjective fish, and adjective plants. Name got her books and verb past tense to check them out. She was so adjective to read them. So as you can see, we have not only a story to type out that we need to print, but we also need the person playing our Mad Lib to be able to input a name, input a famous person, input all of these elements and variables that we need to be able to have to end up with our Mad Lib at the end, which we're going to end up printing the whole thing based on the inputs that we receive. So everything underlined we just looked at is going to be a variable that we need our user to define. As this is a Mad Lib game, it's going to be up to our users rather than anything that we directly input. So our first variable that we're going to need an input from our user for is the name. So name equals input, enter a name. So with our inputs and prints, always make sure that you have it within brackets, otherwise we will not get the code that we want and it'll actually come up as an error. And famous person. And I'm choosing to use double quotation marks, but if you want to use single, that is fine too. It will still work. And if you would also like to come up with your own Mad Lib story, that is completely up to you. And the thing you'll notice from our Mad Lib game is we did have a couple areas where we had name as a variable a couple times. So we only want to put that as a variable once, otherwise, as I said previously, it will overwrite which is up to you, but it's easier to just put it in once, and then you don't have to worry about overwriting every single time name input is put in. This will continue through for your whole code. And again, we had an animal and a verb. Those will continue through as well. And it's also completely up to you how you ask questions to get user input. These can all be your favorite number, or your favorite verb, or your favorite famous person. It's all up to you. And of course, adjectives describe nouns. So this could be a beautiful bee, or a slimy worm, depending on your enters. All right, so we do have 3 adjectives here, and since I don't want to overwrite or have the same thing for each of them, I'm going to actually put in a DJ for adjective 2. So this actually makes a new variable. And this is fish. And then this could potentially be a spiky cactus. And we have a second verb here, so I'm going to say verb 2. And we want this to be past tense, so I'm going to say enter a verb. And because this is in quotation marks, everything is just going to be part of the string. You don't need to worry about adding in more brackets if they're in with the quotation marks. And last one, we need an emotion. All right, so now we're going to have a new variable, and that's going to be our story. So we need to define our story before we are able to print it. So we're going to be defining this based on what we wrote out, and how this is going to work is each of our variables need to be added to the string of characters that make up our story. So instead of having writing out what the input would be for each of these, we're going to say our variable, which is, our first one is name. And then we're going to add that into the string of the rest of what we are going to type out. And the thing to also keep in mind is within your string, you need to put in spaces, because unless you are entering that as part of your input, everything is going to get squished together into one word. And just remember your plus signs. And as you can see, it's a little bit awkward within idle to type out very long strings. You're not going to be able to see everything at the beginning. So if you wanted to put notes down of what the names of all of your variables are, that's probably a good idea. And the thing to keep in mind as well when you're typing out these really long strings, you're going to have to add in any sort of punctuation that's between your variables. All right, so since we have now defined our story, all of our inputs are now entered into the story variable, we can now say print, and we will get the output of our story. So it's going to come up on the other side here. So we're just going to run. Since I'm on a Mac, my run option is actually in the top bar, but if you are using a PC, it'll just be in your application box. See, I forgot to add in a plus sign, so it's coming up as an invalid syntax because we had this is not a string, but I wasn't adding it into a string. So let's try that again. And we can see, did that a couple times, and that's okay. You learn by making mistakes. All right, there we go. So I'm gonna say Eloise. And let's take a look. It said beautiful bees. Okay, and we can see that I made a mistake. So because my variable is plant, not plants, I added in an S. So unfortunately, that's a mistake. And plants was not defined, but plant was. So that's always something to keep in mind. All right, and so we can see because I've entered all of those inputs, now Python is going to print out our story since we finally defined all our variables, including the story. So at the very end, we have Eloise decided to go to the Stuart McLean Library since they wanted to read about pandas that jump. They talked to the librarian who told Eloise the library had 500 books about pandas that jump. The librarian took them to the library's kitchen and down the hall. Eloise saw books about beautiful bees, slimy salmon, and spiky cacti. Eloise got their books and floated to check them out. They were so happy to read them. So because I knew everything that we were putting in, it does kind of change what the inputs are. But if you made this and sent it to a friend, you might get completely different responses, and you'll get some pretty fun options. So that's it for Intro to Python this week. Next week we will be working on a new project introducing some new concepts of Python coding to get you started on your coding journey. And I hope to see you then. Bye.